In this lesson, we're taking a look at string bending on guitar. This is the second technique lesson of series 3 of my beginner's course, where we're focusing on a bunch of techniques to help prepare you for the songs and riffs coming in series 4. String bending is when you physically push a string up to tighten it, causing the pitch of the note to rise. Now this sounds different from just playing that note on a higher fret, because you can hear the sound gradually glide up to that new pitch. String bending adds a lot of character to your playing, and it's an essential part of lead guitar, so let's dive in and see how it's done. So for the purposes of this lesson, we're going to be looking at doing string bends on the 12th fret, because it's an area of the guitar with minimal tension on the strings, so a nice easy place to get started with bending. So if I play the 12th fret natural for you, that's the sound of just the normal note, and then if I pick and bend, you can see the string going up and hear the pitch going up as well. And if I release the bend, we're back to that normal 12th fret sound. So that's the technique that we're talking about here. Now, an important thing to understand is that you can bend the string by different amounts depending on what you want it to sound like in the song. The two that we're going to look at today are tone and semitone bends, but you can bend further once you get used to the technique. You should be familiar with what a tone and a semitone is by now. If not, go and have a watch of the theory lessons from earlier in this series. But essentially, if we're going to perform a tone bend, we need the string to sound like the note 2 frets higher. So if we're bending from the 12th fret, it should sound like the note on the 14th fret, which sounds like this. So if I bend from the 12th fret, and a semitone bend would be for just 1 fret higher, so 13th fret, and then just a little bend to match the sound of that 13th fret. Once you're comfortable with the technique of bending, I would play the reference pitch first and practice bending up to it. So for the tone bend, play the 14th fret, get that sound in your head and then try and match it. Maybe go back and forth a few times. Then same with the semitone bend, so the 13th fret. Just so you get used to pitching the different levels of bends, but remember also that when you're playing along with the song, you can also use the chords in the background to pitch against as well. Into the specifics of the technique now, and in my opinion there are 3 areas to focus on, which are the fingers, the thumb and the wrist, and it takes a combination of using all 3 aspects of this to get true proficiency in your bends. So if we start with the fingers, we're going to be doing a bend with the 3rd finger, because I believe this is easiest to start with, and you can use the other fingers to help it out as well. So 3rd finger is going to line up with the 12th fret. 1st and 2nd finger are also going to be on the same string in the preceding frets. So 1st finger is going to be on the 10th fret, 2nd finger on 11th, 3rd finger on 12th, and you're going to be pushing with all 3 fingers. This is much easier than having these 2 off and just trying to force it up with that 3rd finger. Why not instead just use the strength of all 3 fingers together? And then you can push against the tension of the string. Now the fingers are going to start bent and then straighten as you push the string up like this. So they're nice and curved at the moment. Pick the string, then straighten the fingers, and it's going to push the string up. If I show you from the side a little bit as well, fingers are nice and bent, and then they straighten as the string goes up. Now let's talk about the thumb. Now my advice with the thumb is to wrap it over the top of the neck like this. So when I do the bend, you can see that my fingers are actually touching my thumb, so really wrapping my hand around the neck. This is much easier than having the thumb on the back, where all the pressure is required to be created by your fingers. That literally feels like an uphill battle, trying to push it all with my fingers, whereas thumb over the top, much easier. It pretty much turns your hand into a fist around the neck, and if you think about how much pressure you can create with your fist, think about squeezing the juice out of a lemon or something like that, it's quite a lot, so throwing the thumb over the top is really enabling you to use your whole hand to your advantage. Moving on to the wrist movement now, and this one's a little bit more subtle. It's more difficult to see if I just do the bend for you. But what's essentially happening, if I over-exaggerate it, the wrist is doing this kind of pivot movement where it's moving with my hand and my fingers. Again, this just takes a little bit extra pressure off the fingers, using your hand to your advantage, a little bit like throwing the thumb over the top. You'll find that if you put all of these 3 aspects together, you'll find these bends much more achievable and develop more control. And just one final point with regards to technique, which is dealing with the strings lower in pitch than the one that you're bending. So I'm bending the G string at the moment. So this is talking about what to do with the D string and the A strings. Now, the first thing that can go wrong is those strings can actually get caught under your finger and you can end up actually bending all of them and playing them all together, which is a bit of a nasty sound. The other thing that can happen is you can do your bend, then release the bend, and actually flick the open strings so you get a horrible resonant noise every time you do a string bend. Now, a way that I've discovered of dealing with this, and I'm going to show you a little point of view clip so you can see exactly what I mean here, is to actually fret the note that you're bending with more of the fleshy pad part underneath the finger rather than the fingertip that you would normally try to fret a note with. That leaves your fingertip free to actually bend up the strings below as well and stop them either ringing out or getting caught under your finger or getting caught in quite a nasty way in your fingernail, which can happen sometimes when you first learn, which isn't particularly nice. That way you're only hearing the note fretted by the fleshy part of your finger and the fingertip is keeping the other strings nice and controlled but away from the fretboard. So in this next section of the lesson, we're going to talk about different types of bends, because different forms of bending crops up in different songs and it's worth practicing these different types. So the first one we're going to do is simply to bend and sustain the note. So if we do a tone bend from the 12th fret, remember it's going to sound like the 14th fret. This is on the G string, so 12th fret G string, bend with 3rd finger, bend the note up, and try and sustain the note at the top of the bend. That just ensures that you can hold the pitch of the new note until it dies out naturally. So that would be a bend with sustain. The next form is going to be a bend and release, so bending up to the 14th fret sound, then bringing it back down. That's known as releasing the bend. And again, try and sustain the note at the end, which is going to be the natural 12th fret note, until it just dies out on its own. Next, we have what's known as a staccato bend. Now, staccato in music is where you do a really short note, like this kind of sound. But we're going to be doing that as a bend, so it's going to sound like this. It's quite good for like bluesy stuff. And essentially what we need to do here is bend the string up very quickly and then cut the note off before we hear the release back down to the natural 12th fret. So the first thing that you have to do after the bend is release the pressure in your left hand so that the 3rd finger's not still fretting the note, and it also helps to mute the string with your right hand as well. I'm going to do another video on muting, so keep an eye out for that one as that'll help with this technique, but the sound you're aiming for is this. So you can hear only the bend going up and not coming back down. The next type of bend is going to be a pre-bend, which, as you can probably guess by the name, is where you bend the note first and then pick it. So if we're aiming for the sound of the 14th fret, I'd have to get used to that muscle memory from the bend on the 12th fret, which is not too bad. And then you can release the note. Quite often you get a pre-bend and release, so this sound. Takes a little bit of practice, but that crops up in songs quite a lot. So those are the main types of bends that I want you to practice for now, but I'm going to show you a couple of extras just because they'll likely crop up at some point. The first one is what I call the bend and grab. So if I use this on the 12th fret G string example again, I'm going to bend the 12th fret G string up a tone, and then I'm going to grab the B string on the 13th fret with my little finger, pick it, and then if I want I can go back to the G string and release the bend. So that's this sound. Or I can use the little finger to bar the top 2 strings and get this sound. So it's a pretty cool sound, crops up in a few guitar solos. And the final one is going to be a unison bend, which is where you pick a note and then bend to that note on a different string. Now it's kind of impossible to get the 2 notes perfectly in tune, so that slight out of tuneness that you hear actually makes it sound pretty cool, and it's quite a good rock effect as this sound. So you can hear a kind of warble between the 2 notes as they're just slightly out of tune from each other. So for this example, the note that I'm bending to sounds the same as the 10th fret on the B string. So I'm going to keep my 1st finger on that one, and then I'm going to bend the G string with my 2nd and 3rd finger up to that note as well. So I've got this, and this, and then put them together, and that would be a unison bend. So I hope that's helped you understand the mechanics and get started with string bending. This is a difficult thing to do on guitar at first, so don't worry if you struggle to get the pitch of your bends high enough. Just keep working on it, and remember, employing the right technique will definitely help you out a lot in the long run. You can download tabs for all the exercises from these technique lessons, as well as the material for the rest of the course on my Patreon page via the link in the description. All the lessons are nice and organised on my YouTube channel, so feel free to subscribe if you want to follow along, and in the next few lessons we're going to crack on with some more techniques, so I'll see you there.